This is Marketing from the Front Lines, where we speak with B2B marketers who are in the trenches, bringing technology to market. Here's your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines.io.
Hey, everyone, and thanks for listening. Today, we're speaking with Meredith Blechman, Head of Marketing at Archive. Meredith, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Super excited to have you here. Let's go ahead and jump into the big question. Why marketing? What are you doing here?
Yeah. So there's a story behind it, I guess. My love of marketing started in college and I fell into it a bit backwards. It wasn't my major or anything, but my junior year, I had a hole in my schedule and I found a marketing class and decided to take it. And the focus of the class was about how to build a recognizable, enduring brand. And that's where I fell in love with the idea of building brands and growing a brand and the role of storytelling and building a brand. And it was totally new to me, but I really connected with it. And so I ended up taking as many marketing classes as I could those last 2 years of school. And that's what led me to my first job, which was in CPG. I worked for a beauty brand as a brand manager, spent a bunch of years there, and then took time to go to an ad agency where I was part of what was essentially the agency's first ever digital team. And then from there, I magically fell into a marketing role at a tech startup. And now I've spent over a decade working for early to mid-stage tech companies. And the reason why I really love marketing is because you have to be both creative and analytical. And the reason I gave my background a little bit is because I've worked in marketing in different sectors like CPG on the consumer side, ad agency, and then in tech in a B2B SaaS role. And I still believe that even though there's some roles on a marketing team where maybe you need to cater to one strength over the other, I do believe that to lead the marketing function at any company, it's super important to be able to flex both muscles. So I just love the challenges that come along with that, specifically figuring out how to cut through noise and authentically connect with a consumer. So I love the challenge of how do you show up for your consumer as a brand and how do you inspire both an emotional connection while also solving real problems. So everything about my job that requires me to figure out what people tick just keeps me getting up every day.
What would be some survival guide tips for a marketer who's moving into the tech world, into the startup world? And what are some tips that they can use to survive and navigate? What I found, oftentimes marketers move into startups and they have a hard time adapting because it's a very different world compared to agencies, for example.
Yes. I think the ability to kind of move and adapt quickly is not something you necessarily learn in a big kind of corporate setting. And I think that's super essential in a startup. And also why I love startups is because there's not a lot of red tape. You are allowed to kind of try and test anything and you get to learn and see what fails really quickly and then you kind of move on. I also feel like there's a lot of learnings from those other worlds that you can kind of bring into the B2B tech world. And one of those things is listening to your consumer. I think that's important in any marketing role. And so for somebody who's moving into a tech role or kind of going from consumer side to tech and startup, that all still applies. So whenever I'm starting at a new company, my first thing I tackle is figuring out how I know my customers. So doing user interviews and listening and finding out what their challenges are, what their goals are, what they love about the product that we're selling, and kind of getting a clear picture of how your product fits into all that, I think is adaptable across industries. And I think what's most important, particularly in the tech side, is how do you make sure you're delivering on what it is your customer needs and not what you think they need. And I think that's something that's really important for anyone going into tech, is to do the work to figure out what it is they need and figure out how you kind of bring your product to the table in a way that makes sense for them.
When it comes to brands that inspire your approach to marketing, who's someone that comes to mind right now? Is there any startups or any interesting companies that you're seeing today? A lot of times we get answers like Nike or Apple, which of course are inspirational brands, but it's somewhat obvious. Are there any under the radar brands that are really inspiring how you approach marketing, how you think about marketing?
So I have a brand that maybe is not under the radar, as you say, but I think there's a unique way that they approach marketing that I really like. And so it's Spotify, and maybe you consider that as kind of in the same category. But one of the things I love about Spotify is that they're able to do, especially through their marketing, they're able to make something like music, which is so personal, but do an incredibly great job of evoking emotions in a communal way. And so, one example, I think maybe it feels obvious, but is their rap campaign. I just find to be so smart. And I've actually taken a lot of learnings from what they did with Spotify rap. I think, as I mentioned, they created something that is both personal and communal at the same time. So you get all these personal insights, but then you also learn about the entire community, and you can simultaneously feel part of a collective. And even though they launched this, I don't know, like 10 years ago, whatever it is, it's still viral. It's something that's anticipated every year, and they don't just copy and paste. They continue to innovate on it every year and add new content each year. And I think they do that in a lot of their advertising. And it's something that I try to implement and take into my own world of marketing is how do you build both the personal and communal connections to your brand? It's hard to do both. And I think they do that really well.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
Spotify Wrapped is so funny to me because I view it as I would never post it because some of the songs that I'm listening to, I'm like, I don't want people to know that my top songs.
Yeah, well, half of mine is my kids' top songs, and then half of it is mine. And it's kind of funny to realize how much time my kids get on my Spotify in addition to myself. So totally get that.
That's just a hit marketing campaign with a number of startups that have tried to copy it. You're not in the same industry, of course, but I've seen so many different companies have their version of it. And some of them just done an awesome job. Some of it looks incredibly forced. Like the CEO sent a link and said, how do we rip this off? But I've seen a few where I'm you just nailed it. And it's awesome. And I think that's what marketing's about is, taking inspiration from other areas that work and then make it work for you.
Definitely. Completely agree.
Are we going to see a version of that at Archive?
There might be. Yeah. And you got to make everything your own. Copying and pasting won't feel authentic to what I'm doing. And so, yeah, it's all about getting the inspiration and kind of understanding why it is you love that campaign and then figuring out a way that works for you and your brand and feels authentic in that way.
And when it comes to Archive, what does the brand do and who is the ICP?
Yeah. So we're a Series A venture-backed startup, and we power circular businesses for brands. So that can include resale or re-commerce, as it's sometimes referred to, repair, trade-in, warranty, recycling, all of which ensure that a brand's products are staying in circulation and out of landfill. And maybe in more layman's terms, we're essentially labeling a brand's secondhand business. So instead of buying or selling something used on a marketplace like Poshmark or The RealReal or eBay, you can buy and sell directly through the brand, either online or in stores. And Archive powers all of that on the back end. And our mission is really environmental at its core. So it's estimated that the fashion industry accounts for 8% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And most of that comes from new item production. And yet here we are producing more and more stuff every year. And much of that ends up in landfill. It's never even used. So what we're trying to do is keep products in use, reduce waste, and we're doing this by building a new revenue stream for brands through the second or third sale of products that already exist. So they can increase revenue and profit without increasing production. And that's what's harmful to the environment. And so to your question, who is our ICP? So we primarily work with brands in the apparel and footwear industries. We now work with over 50 brands globally. And some examples of our partners include The North Face, New Balance, Oscar de la Renta, Hannah Anderson, Doc Martens. So kind of these really recognizable brands. And you can go to all of their websites and buy their secondhand products directly from them.
In terms of marketing, what are you doing today that's working and then what's not working?
Yeah. So what's working? I just talked about our ICP and the customers that I'm targeting. So in the apparel and footwear industries, similar to how you hear about they must have an omni-channel strategy to engage with their customers. I feel that that's the same for a B2B marketer. And I've always believed in the power of building in-person relationships, specifically in the post-COVID era. And so we ensure we have multiple opportunities each quarter in our marketing calendar for in-person relationship building, be it through events or conferences or whatever it might be. And while this might mean we're touching 20 people versus a digital campaign that might reach thousands, we're connecting with them on a deeper level than that digital campaign ever could. And we've really seen these become opportunity to build our community and build loyalty and build advocacy, and that the quality of these interactions often trumps the kind of quantity of a blanket online campaigns. And often what we'll do is we'll bring together existing and prospective customers so that it's not just us doing the selling, but our existing customers kind of take over, and they take over the role of advocating for us in that personal setting. And that social proof has been so powerful for us. And so, yeah, the in-person touch points has been really effective for us, particularly in our industry.
What about what's not working? Is there anything you were experimenting with or using before that you've just seen kind of decline or crash in terms of the effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our paid marketing strategies are kind of just not driving the ROI that I thought that they would, especially recently. And what I've realized is kind of this like blanket one size fits all messaging where you kind of go broad and wide and you try to touch as many people as possible is just not doing the trick for us. So anything that's kind of speaking more generic about the benefits of our product just isn't cutting it. And instead, it's more personalized, targeted messaging that is speaking to an individual need or preference of the company we're targeting or the role within our company. In that company, that's what's working for us, to the point we are even creating unique LinkedIn ads for each of the top companies that we're targeting. And so leaning into that more ABM strategy, we're seeing this in outbound sales as well as marketing. So what we found is that even though it might take more time to craft something more personalized and custom, and it's easier to put out one ad campaign than it is 20 variations of it, we definitely see higher ROI than with some of that more templated marketing.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
What about different tools and technologies? So I'm sure your world is filled with a lot of different tools. I think there's that famous like MarTech market map. You know, it started out 10 years ago that you could actually see the logos. Now it's like almost like a meme of like, you can't make sense of it. You know, everything is,
Yeah.
you can't even see the logos.
Yeah.
What are some like new tools or tech that you're using or you're excited about, potentially using?
Yeah, it's not new, but HubSpot has been tried and true for me in many different startups. So I just find that HubSpot's tools are like the easiest to use, the easiest to implement. They span across everything that I would want in a tech stack, especially for a very resource constrained team. So in most of the startups that I've worked for, I've been the first marketing hire, and in like kind of that seed or even Series A stage where you can hire one or two people, and your team has to work a lot harder to do all the things that you want them to be doing. And so I've actually found that just simplifying is what works best. And I think they have what HubSpot offers, does the job in all the different areas I need it to. And so that honestly might not be the most exciting answer, but that's what we're using and it works for us. And it definitely has worked for me as I've kind of grown and scaled teams from like 1 to 5 and kind of beyond that. Then you can start getting a little more creative and adding more tools and making sure that you have enough people and time and resources to make those tools all effective and speak to each other. But when you don't have all the time and people and resources to do that, I just find that HubSpot is the best of doing all the different things.
When you join a team as the first marketing hire, what do you do first? What's that playbook? How do you get onboarded? How do you get ramped up?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about this, but listening to the consumer, doing the user interviews, figuring out who our customer is, that's always the first thing I do. And the individual conversations go a long way. You can get the nuances and insights from your customers about why they love your product. So I always start with that. And then for me, it's always thinking about the brand first. And I'm a brand marketer at heart, which might be rare for a B2B SaaS leader, but that's what my background is. And even in the world of tech and B2B SaaS, I really feel that like you'll never effectively communicate with your consumer if you don't have your bearings on what you stand for as a company and as a brand. And I think it's incredibly important early on at a company to define your values, your mission, your purpose, and carry that through every consumer touch point. And while some might argue it's harder to inspire an emotional connection with a B2B tech company, I do think that it's an essential challenge. And I don't think you can succeed as a brand by only focusing on your product's solutions. So sure, our software solves X, Y, and Z problem. But I always think about how we take that a step further and add an emotional layer to something tangible. And so that's in terms of what I do first, it's establishing what we stand for as a brand and who we are, and kind of honing in on both the visual brand identity and the brand messaging, and then making sure that that carries through everything we do.
Are there any things that you see on LinkedIn of other marketers talking about that, they believe to be true that you disagree with, or are you thinking maybe as a blanket advice that applies to everyone? Anything like that come to mind?
Yes. I would say, and maybe this is something I hear directly or a lot, but I'd say that when I hear people say the stick to what works, I have to roll my eyes a bit. And I'm actually kind of surprised that marketers today still say that and that I still hear that. And I mean, sure, if some tactic has worked well in the past, by all means, keep going. But eventually, everything has diminishing returns today in marketing. And you just can't say, well, it worked before, so let's keep going. I think in today's world, there's not really a channel that you can just set it and leave it. You have to keep tweaking and adapting and innovating, and the things around us are changing so quickly. And so I think it's important that you're constantly like going back and looking at everything you do deeply and making sure that it's still delivering in the ways that you wanted to. And also, if you're never trying something new, how do you know there's not a bigger opportunity out there? So yeah, stick to what works just kind of makes me cringe a little bit.
I agree. I agree completely. Now, our final question here. Let's imagine that you have a marketing friend. It's new year, new job. They're getting ready to start a new job in 2025. What's your number one piece of advice for them to be successful in their new role?
Yeah, I think staying on top of trends and changes in consumer behavior is so, so important. And one of the biggest challenges for marketers is adapting to the widespread changes in our world. And what I think is different now, even than a few years ago, is that the frequency of those changes is increasing. So every year, I feel like we're talking as a marketing team about changing consumer behavior, the new technologies that have emerged. Now it's economic uncertainty, budget cuts, consumer skepticism, like all of that. And so what I always try to keep in the back of my mind is that even in a time when your brand is experiencing growth, you can't be complacent. And I think that's true for all the B2B tech startups. So the world is changing around us. We have to react to that. And you have to be on top of changing trends. You have to innovate. You have to stay relevant. And, for me, I'm lucky that Archive is growing and growing quickly, and that's great. But it doesn't mean you can kind of sit back and relax. If you aren't forward thinking and innovating, you aren't doing your job, particularly as a marketer. And so, at the end of the day, it's marketing that's the driving force for creating and capturing demand. And if you aren't a step ahead of what your customer is doing, what is changing in the world, you're going to fall behind. So just being super adaptable, being forward thinking, and kind of keeping in touch with everything that's going on in the world and with your consumer is incredibly important.
Amazing. I love it. All right, let's wrap here. Before we do, if there's any marketers that are listening in that want to follow along with you, where should we send them?
Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active in my professional life. And so it's Meredith Blechman. Look me up there and connect.
Amazing. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.